when I was in middle school, me and my friends, we would make little videos all the time. We'd make our own movies. That was like one of my favorite things to do. And I learned a lot about like the behind the scenes things. In fact, I actually had a job when I was in college. I started a business, and we made videos for people. And often it would take, for every 1 minute of the video, it was something like 4 hours of work behind the scenes, right? For every 1 minute, it'd be like 4 hours, and that was if it was easy. So we learned a lot. Like, when you look at some of your favorite movies, sometimes you miss how much work is going on behind the scenes. Particularly, I love like action movies. And one of the things that you don't realize often when you watch action movies is how many actors are in one scene. Like, how many of you have seen any of the Jurassic World, any of those pieces? Okay. I don't know if you knew this, but there are 4 Chris Pratts. Look at this. 4 Chris Pratts here. I don't know if you know if you even know who the real one is, but there were three stunt guys who their entire job was to do the stunts so that Chris Pratt didn't have to. They would do all of the hard work. They would do all kinds of jumps, and they'd get pulled, and they'd get thrown, and they'd get fake eaten by velociraptors and all kinds of things so that Chris Pratt didn't have to. But that work is super hard because time after time you're doing it again and again and again and again and again to get it just right for the camera. Like, there's a famous movie series called the Mission Impossible series, and the main character in that is played by a guy named Tom Cruise, who often does a lot of his own stunts. Real quick, you can throw that up there. I'm going to talk over it a little bit, but this is Tom Cruise, and when he was shooting one of the Mission Impossible movies, he decided that he wanted to do his own stunt and hold on to an Airbus, that plane, and they had to do every take for 6 to 8 minutes, right? So he had to hold on to a plane every single take for like 6 to 8 minutes, holding on. It's going 100 knots as he's flying. He's only got one wire holding him onto the thing. If there was anything in the air, on the runway, on the terminal, it could fly up and damage him, so they had to give him like special contacts. They had to clear the runway. They had to do all kinds of things. But he wasn't happy doing it once. He made them do it 8 times, which is actually really small, because in one of the other Mission Impossible movies, Tom Cruise ended up practicing for one scene over 200 hours. 200 hours practicing for the stunt of one scene. Oftentimes, these guys have to do the same thing over and over and over again, and I think it's a really good spiritual lesson to look at what these guys do, because while it's true for them, it's also true for us that sometimes you have to do the same thing over and over, and it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes you have to do the same things over and over and over, and it doesn't always feel good. That's true. Every time I ask a student, hey, how's school going? They go, it's again. And I have to do it again. And it's still happening to me. And I'm like, yes, that is school. Sometimes you have to do the same thing over and over, and it doesn't feel good. Like maybe you're going through some difficult times. Or maybe you're signed up for a sport right now, and you hate practice. Maybe there's a situation in your life that you've asked God to help you, and it just keeps going. And so there's this question of, why do I have to keep going through it if it doesn't feel good. But Jesus actually warns us that not all of life was going to be easy. In fact, he took it a step further. In John 15, Jesus didn't just promise that things would sometimes be hard. He promised that it definitely would be hard. In John 15, verse 18, this is what Jesus says. If the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you're no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. Do you remember what I told you? A slave is not greater than his master. Since they persecuted me, naturally, they'll persecute you too. And if they had listened to me, they would listen to you. They'll do all this to you because of me, for they've rejected the one who sent me. They'd not be guilty if I had not come and spoken to them, but now they have no excuse for their sin. Jesus says, hey, guess what? If people hated me, if people hated Jesus for being good, they'll be mad at you too. If people went against Jesus, if Jesus had opposition, if Jesus had trouble, if Jesus had a hard time when he was on earth, we absolutely will too. And in fact, Jesus is saying sometimes that's part of God's plan. But the good news is this, that even though we go through difficult things, even though we go through hard times, even though we face challenges, even though we're in the middle of all of those, God can use them. In fact, today, JVOX, I want you to remember something. With God, difficult moments can help our character grow. With God, God can take some of those hard things. God could take some of those repeat takes. God can take some of those challenges. God can take some of those things that you're facing day after day after day. God can take those and he can grow something in you. So we're going to take a moment right now. We're going to get into our tag groups and we're going to have a conversation and then we'll be back. All right? Let's do it. How many of you would do your own stunts? Some of you would. Some of you would. Yeah. I think that would be really cool if it wasn't so difficult. Like a lot of us are like, hey, I would love to do my own stunts, but at the same time, sometimes we get frustrated when things are the same every single day. And part of that is so challenging. Sometimes we go through, we're doing the same thing. Like I know that if I asked you, hey, how much do you value school? You would say probably very little. But the reality is that you are much better because of school. Something is changing in you slowly over time. And the frustrating part often is that we don't see it. We don't feel it. We just kind of have to trust that something good is happening. Which is why I think there's something else in movies that is kind of cool. How many of you have ever heard of an Easter egg in a movie before? An Easter egg, okay. An Easter egg is something that's hidden. It actually started in video games. There's this old video game. And one of the developers of the video game decided to hide his name in the game. And so only if you got to a very certain part of the video game would you find that on the level you would see created by, and it had his name on it. And when the company found out that he had done that, instead of getting mad about it, they went, oh my gosh, this is really cool. Let's hide Easter eggs everywhere. And so there's some companies that have done this, like Disney Pixar. Pixar hides eggs everywhere. For example, there's an Easter egg in Pixar, and it's the A113. A113. They hide that A113 in almost every single Pixar movie ever made. And here's why. A113 is the classroom that most of the Pixar animators had a class in at Cal Art. And so in a way to like honor that class where they learned a lot of their animation skills, they hide A113 in all of the shots. And so if you're looking carefully, you can see the secret. And what's really cool is when you see that secret, you recognize that there's somebody there working behind the scenes. Like, bigger than the story, when you see that secret, you go, oh, I can see the creator in the middle of this. If you know that God is helping you grow, you can look for the Easter eggs in your movie. See, the Bible says that God works all things for the good of those who love him. Hey, fifth grade boys, shh, 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 shh. God says that the Bible says that God works all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Which means that when you're going through difficult things, and you're going through a lot of difficult things, that God is at work. And God is doing things, and so he's leaving Easter eggs along the way that you can find. It's amazing. I asked somebody recently, I said, hey, how have you seen God at work in your life? And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is they had to think about that for a second. They went, how have I seen God at work? What is God doing in my life? And then they said, wait, I know. I've had a hard time lying to my parents. And recently, I realized that I would lie and I would never even think about it. I would just lie to my parents and I would just say, I would say something that's not true. And it was just what I did. But recently, I lied to my dad and I immediately knew that God was showing me that this was wrong. And I feel like I need to go say something to him. For this person, that was an Easter egg. That was a moment where they said, you know what? I didn't realize it, but apparently God has been working on my lying and my honesty. And so in this moment, God is doing something that is new. I think that's really, really cool. God's got these little moments where he's doing things in us, but sometimes they're so slow and they're so small and they feel so insignificant. And that's why they're difficult. God is often doing something big by doing a lot of really small things. Let me give you an example. How many of you saw any of the Into the Spider-Verse movies, right? Those are really great. They are some of the best. Did you shake your head no? No way. I love the Spider-Verse movies. They're so good. Now, some of you might have seen a scene in those. Throw it up real quick. I'm going to talk through it. But it's the scene where all of a sudden the world turns into Lego. And this scene right here was actually really difficult to put together. It's a scene that took 3 months to make. Just this 20 seconds, it took 3 months to put together. And it was put together by one animator, which I think is even more impressive. They spent 2 months planning, 1 month actually building, and all of that was done by a 14-year-old. This is Preston, I'm going to butcher his last name, I'm so sorry, Mutanga. Preston Mutanga was 14 when he collaborated on the Into the Spider-Verse movie and made this. Now, here's what happened. Years before that, Preston liked Legos and he liked movies, and he decided, hey, let me try to put these things together and do something. And so when he first started out, go to that next picture, they were really simple. He was using just the characters and trying to make the bricks and trying to figure out some of these things, and it looked about that good. It was just a lot of hard work. It's frame by frame. It's moving something ever so slightly 24 times per second to make a video. And it would take forever, but he started to get better at it and started to use other things like Blender, and he started making a little better characters. Like those had some lights and some shadow and some different cool things going on. And then he kept working and got a little better. And so at this point, he was improving slowly. It was a lot of practice day after day, day after day, day after day, day after day, a lot of doing the same things. And a lot of those days feel like he was doing much better. But then he got to this point where he started to make these Lego movies on YouTube. And the creators of Into the Spider-Verse saw his work on YouTube and reached out to him and said, hey, we have to have you for our movie. They had no idea that he was 14 years old. But it was because he had committed himself to doing something small again and again over time, doing all of the work, even though it didn't feel like things were moving, even though it didn't feel like things were growing, even though it didn't feel like things were changing, something was happening. And this is exactly how God works in us. God is often doing big things through a lot of very small things. And so I want to encourage you in something. Number one is this. We need to be willing to ask God for help. Hey guys, shh, 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 shh. We need to be willing to ask God for help. Because God is there. He's interested in helping. He wants to do something incredible for us. He wants to show up in our world. So ask God for help. But like I just said, when God shows up to help, it's not always immediately obvious. When God shows up to help, it's not like God is always like, hey, kicking stuff down like, I'm here. Sometimes, most often, commonly, when God shows up to help, he goes, I'm doing something really small. I'm doing something, again, really small. And over time, God begins to build something. So ask God for help, but then trust God, even when you can't see him big at work, doing massive things. Trust God that he is working. And then look for the Easter eggs. Look for the progress. Look to see what God is doing. If you ask God for help and you go, God, I need you to show up in here, and then you trust him, God, thank you. I know you are going to help me. And then begin to look at, I know you have helped me. This is where I've seen you at work. This is what I know you're doing. This is where you are growing something in me. And when you do that, guess what? Do you know what? When I see God at work in my life, it gets me really excited. Because sometimes I'll ask God, I'll be like, God, I need help in this. And then a couple months will go by, and I'll be just thinking like, gosh, where did God do anything? Where has he been? What's been going on? But if I pause and I stop and I go, man, let's see. I used to do this. I used to think this. I used to feel like this. I used to be like this. But now I can see God doing something different in me. That's a big deal. And all of those little things, they don't feel like much, but with God, difficult moments can help us grow.